Welcome to the Meat and Potatoes podcast. We're here with Christina Qi, who is the CEO and founder of Databento.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. We've had a lot of smart and accomplished people on the podcast, and I think your story is going to be one of the best ones. But we'll get to that. Let's hear about the founding story of Databento.
Sure. So I have the weirdest background. This goes really, really far back. So I'll just tell you first, I am from Utah originally, but then I went to MIT for college. So I moved out to Boston. And that was when like all the struggles began. I thought that it would be the end of it, but I barely graduated. Struggled a lot in school. Didn't know what to declare. All my friends, from all my classmates were coming from really elite schools, and I definitely, coming from Utah, like didn't really have that kind of background. Just went to public school and everything. And so what ended up happening was I declared a major at the last minute because I failed out of every other major, didn't know what to do, and declared a major called management science. And then what happened was, thankfully, management, I didn't even know what that was at the time, was pretty related to finance, and there's a lot of finance finance jobs on Wall Street. And so I started applying to all these jobs on Wall Street every summer. I did an internship somewhere, actually did one at Zions Bank here in Utah, did one at Goldman Sachs here in Utah as well. And then junior summer so just did internships here and there in finance in general. And from there, actually, for my junior summer, it was just a very intensive internship because it was like my final one. I was supposed to accept an offer afterwards. And for the internship, we had to come up with a trading strategy kind of thing. And I was like, well, I went to MIT, I have a quantitative background sort of. And so I came up with a quantitative trading strategy. And that, when I presented it on the last day, spent all summer preparing for it. And when I presented it, I remember my boss kind of just like laughing at me. And one of the guys on the team was like, "Oh my God, this is the most ridiculous thing ever." And someone was like, "What the F are you doing?" And I cried that day. I don't remember any of this. I had repressed those memories, but apparently I cried. And I had a bunch of friends who had to take me in and be like, "It's fine, Christina." I didn't get a return offer. Obviously, they didn't want me back. And so I went back to my dorm room my senior year of college, and of course, it's MIT, right? So all my classmates, they all had like a dozen jobs lined up. I had a friend, my roommate was like, "Do I want to do Google or Apple?" And I'm like, really? I'm sitting here like I don't have anything lined up. I have to start from scratch and like apply to jobs that I just didn't know what I wanted to do because I didn't like that experience very much, on Wall Street. And so one of my friends was like, "Well, why don't you like get some closure on this problem, right? And just trade the strategy on your own." And I was like, and she's like, "Look, if it doesn't, whether it works or not, like, even if it doesn't work, at least they were right and their feedback was correct. And if it does work, then that like, hey, you have something going." And I was like, okay. And so I just literally started trading it. And that's how I started my first company, actually. By the end of the year, I started with $1,000, which I earned from the internship. And then by the end of the school year, which is like, 9 months later or something, I had made $40,000. And I paid off my student loans. I was $40,000 in debt at the time. So I was like just about barely paid off my student loans. And I was like, wow, like I can do this on my own. Like I don't need to go work for Wall Street, in order to make a living. Even if it's just $40,000 a year, like I would be happy. I didn't need to go through that kind of stress and that experience, again, the politics and everything. Just decided to start on my own. And so that's what became my first company, which is a hedge fund. It's called Dome Yard. Is it still alive today? Yes, surprisingly still alive today, but I left to start my second company. So what happened over the years was, so we were trading, on my own, and then eventually hired some people, found some co-founders, did the whole startup life. And it was a really, definitely fascinating journey. I've written a manuscript about it, and then people are like, "You should publish it." And I'm like, I don't know. I need to like give me a couple more years to like distance myself emotionally from it still. But anyway, so we were doing this hedge fund thing and we're scaling in different ways. We were trading about 8 or 9 years later, we're trading 7 billion a day, which for a high frequency firm, it's actually pretty small, but for like a hedge fund, it was pretty big. So anyway, long story short was we scaled okay. But there's one area we couldn't scale in, and that was data. What we mean by that is like every year the cost of data per person went up every year instead of down as we're hiring more people, which doesn't make any sense, right? As you're supposed to be able to, things are supposed to get cheaper per person as you scale and grow every year. And we realized at some point this was not going to be sustainable because we were spending millions of dollars on this. And so I started asking our investors, and some of the friends in the industry, how do you guys, deal with this data problem, right? One of them was a company called Goldman Sachs. And I just literally just asked, I think my former boss, maybe, I forgot, just asked someone from Salt Lake City. I was like, how do you guys deal with this data problem? You're 10,000 times bigger than us. How did you scale, right, and deal with this data? How do you get data to your team? And they basically said, well, all of our analysts on this floor, they share one Bloomberg terminal, and they like have a little password on a sticky note, and that's our high-tech solution. And I was like, wait, that's illegal, right? Like, you can't do that. And he's kind of just dodged my question. He kind of says, well, if you think about it, the average turnover on this floor at the analyst level, it's 12 months, right? So like, why spend $50,000 per person, half their salary on data stuff when they're going to leave anyway? If we did that, Goldman Sachs wouldn't be, that we wouldn't exist as a company today if we did that.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, so you have to literally, not break the law, but, like basically bypass these agreements and stuff and do this stuff, kind of underhanded stuff in order to, survive as a company. So I started talking to the analysts and the traders and the people, at the bottom that the manager is referencing. And one of the traders literally comes to me. He's like, oh, I'm leaving next month because there's no data. I've been waiting for months, and I need this niche data set. But I know Goldman has it, but like, I just don't have permission to access it, right? Because someone over somewhere on some team has it. And so I was like, wow, okay. And so then they came to us first and they were like, can you help us with this data stuff? Like, we really need a solution. And I was like, wow, like we need this too as a startup, they gave us their constraints. They're like, look, we have a limited budget. We're always switching teams. We're always switching ideas. So I don't want to sign like a 2-year contract. And I was like, yeah, me neither. I don't want to sign a 2-year, $1 million data contract. Like, who wants to do that, right? And we're not going to use all the data anyway. And so we were like, yeah, we need the exact same thing as a startup. And so then that's how the idea for Databento came around, was basically just hearing complaints from the industry and seeing an area that my previous company was failing at, was not able to scale at all. And I was like, I want to create a company that not only my previous, startup would want to use, but hopefully, everyone would want to use for finance and fintech. And so in a nutshell, basically, Databento, we want to be the data backbone of a lot of, any app or product or startup that needs kind of data behind the scenes. So I guess the most common example is if you pull up a stock price from an app like Robinhood or any of those other apps like that, that data might come from us, I guess, depending on which data set you're pulling up and stuff like that. So we provide data APIs to a lot of these fintech startups, as well as large financial firms too. But I would say my personal favorite is whenever we help startups launch faster and they don't have to raise $1 million in funding anymore, because we're making the data much more affordable. Everything's pay as you go. Let's say it's like $5 per gigabyte. So it's more like it's like AWS pricing. We're bringing that pricing model that Amazon has and bringing it into the data space for the first time. So yeah, it's been really fun, and have enjoyed that's the journey so far. We're still pretty early, but yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I knew it was going to be a very cool story. So there's a lot to unpackage there. You mentioned high frequency trading. You mentioned like trade strategies, right? Mm-hmm. Wall Street's several hundred years old and very cutthroat.
Right.
If there's a way to make an extra penny, people are going to figure it out pretty quick.
Right.
And then it's dog eat dog. So that'd be like an entire class on that. But if you can summarize it, I guess in 2 ways. The data that a high frequency trader would need to optimize their strategy and be at the top of the mountain could be any number of things, right? Do you have any examples of what that data might be to give them the advantage?
Oh man, there's so many different types of data nowadays. So in general, at a high level, there's mainly in finance 2 types of data. We call one market data, which is like stock prices. So if you Google, like Google stock price or Amazon stock or any other kinds of stocks, like that's what we call market data today, on the trades that are happening, the prices of those stocks. And then there's something that we call alternative data. And alternative data means like Wall Street bets data or Twitter data, like social media stuff. It could also be satellite feeds, or there's been hedge funds that are formed around like they have satellite data somehow, and maybe they have data on like shipments that are shipping containers and where all the blockages are and where who's coming into which ports and stuff like that. And from that data, they can deduce, okay, like this is going to affect Walmart and a Target, and they can like somehow figure out their earnings based on what's coming in and out, or Walmart parking lots, even how parking lot traffic works and stuff like that. So all of this is called alternative data, because it's like not directly, it does if you did enough work and research behind it, you can see how it would affect the markets or something. But they're not directly like the stock prices themselves. And so that could be Elon Musk's Twitter feed as well, by the way, for alternative data. So
Yeah.
Donald Trump, Elon Musk, a lot of really influential people, they'll tweet about something and then suddenly the stock just goes up or down based on that behavior. So that's all alternative data, and there's a lot of it out there.
And the alternative data, a lot of that's free, right? But you only have so many brain cells and eyeballs. That needs to be packaged, I would assume. And in the olden days, let's say you were a commodities trader in New York and you happen to be on vacation in Florida. Let's say it's 1950. And you heard at the local watering hole that there was a bad plague that was going to get the oranges, right? You'd jump on the phone, call your partners. Yeah. That's an old-fashioned example, right? Like nothing illegal there, but like you had data that others didn't have, and you could short orange juice. Type of thing. All right, so then with like high frequency, all of that, it's times a billion or a trillion, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's become electronic, and then there's ways to kind of even look at data historically and look at patterns in data itself, which has never been, it's like before then it was really hard to do, and now people do that kind of stuff too. So it's like any way to get faster to the exchange is kind of basically what a lot of, not just high frequency, it's any kind of trader these days does. So like, it was like 100 years ago, people would send the Olympic runners, which is really interesting. They would hire people who were Olympians, Olympic gold medalists, and hire them to, whenever they found information. This is before the markets were electronic at all. So it was a physical like marketplace. They would hire the runner to grab this trade and like go place the trade before everyone else to try to front run everyone in the market. So it would be physically done like that. And now everything's just done through cables and wires and stuff like that, for better or worse. I would say like, the good news about that is, it's nice that when I place a trade now I can place it on my phone. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. I don't need to go to a physical marketplace like a farmer's market and, barter for stuff anymore. So the markets are what we call it really much more efficient these days. Yeah. You can buy something and someone's already selling it to you instantly. And I think that's pretty awesome. But absolutely, I think with every technology, there's always, there's risks, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong, same with, crypto is a whole nother field. I'm sure you talk about that in other podcasts as well. But with all of those things combined, there's innovation and there's also areas that are super risky.
Yeah, for sure. It's quite the world. And so if people are, talking about data, you would assume Wells Fargo would want data and Goldman would, right? Like, even a layman that has no interest in business or finance would know they have a lot of data. But it can trickle all the way down to startups that aren't even finance startups, right? Like, but then it's prohibitive to get these data sets, and they can come from any number of places. You mentioned a Bloomberg terminal, but there's all sorts of reports, and this is locked. You need the key. Now, startups accessing data, it puts them at an advantage if they've got the right business model and the right team, but they might be priced out regardless, right?
Right, yeah.
So now, if I understand it right, Databento, you can a la carte it a little bit? Okay.
Basically, I guess the history is that, Bloomberg is the incumbent in our industry, and it's funny because if you actually go to a Smithsonian museum, you can see there's a Bloomberg terminal inside because, they played a big role in history and the history of computers in general, not just for financial data, but I think they kind of helped the computer industry and move forward, which is amazing. The problem is that they're designed for kind of that 1990s trader, at the end of the day, with, you imagine the 6 monitors and the phones is really hectic, they're trading, looking at these screens and all these trading prices. But, these days, the modern day trader, or really anyone in fintech who looks at data, they're just I'm on my phone, my parents on their phones looking at stuff on Schwab or Vanguard or whatever. Yeah. So like the times have kind of changed, and the way that data is consumed is very different. It's no longer the 6 monitors anymore, and so that's what we do is we just provide the data APIs to a lot of startups and stuff. And Bloomberg, when you get a Bloomberg, comes with the hardware, comes with the keyboard, and comes with whatever other things it needs. And we don't do that. We don't give any hardware. It's just kind of like we're just designed for here's the API key, plug it into whatever you need, and just pay as you go. And so I guess more designed for the modern day kind of data user these days. We were I guess Bloomberg was designed more for like Wall Street,
Yeah.
like the more elites of Wall Street. I kind of get that feeling just because they're so expensive. It's $25,000 per person
Yeah.
per year. It's kind of expensive. So we don't want to be like that. We're like, look, let's make it affordable, and it doesn't need to be sold by head. It doesn't make any sense. You're not going to have a data user, like per person. That just doesn't make any sense anymore like that. So we're just doing a more modern business model on top of it. Yeah.
Very cool. And so if you need data, the inputs are vast, right? It could be the Bloomberg machine. It could be some data room.
Right.
It could be something really niche-y, right? And the data can be sold, right? Obviously.
Right.
But you only need 1% of that data to help make your decision or help your business. You're not going to buy that 100%. So is there an example of, like, again, the inputs, how you guys interact with them and you say, here's our business, here's what we want to do. Can we, because they're going to have to give you permission, right?
Right. So we get all of our data directly from the source whenever possible. So if it's like stock price data, we go to NASDAQ, we go to New York Stock Exchange, all the different exchanges, and we're like, hey, and how we usually how we convince them is we're like, hey, we're going to give you access to users you've never seen before. These are startups who couldn't afford a Bloomberg. They can't afford this kind of stuff, and they can't afford to get your data directly from you. And so we're going to take this data. Yes, we're going to break it up into more like retail, so it's going to be a la carte. And how we came up with Databento was like, instead of buying the whole grocery store, you could just buy a bento box for dinner, like just something that's consumable and that you really want. And so you just only pay for what you're actually using that day. And so that's business model basically. It's interesting because it's not just small companies that need us for, sometimes they're like, I only need 1 or 2 stocks, right? But also larger companies we've discovered are like that too. They're not using every piece of, if you go to like one of those exchanges, they try to sell you 55,000 products at once. And you're like, I don't need 55,000 different stocks, right? Like, I don't think anybody really does that these days. And so it's really nice in that it's just trying to make it more affordable and accessible, I guess, to the modern day user. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's probably where you start out, right? Like the data providers. And that would, you're shaking the trees, trying to get meetings to explain what you guys do,
right.
how you do it. You mentioned the benefit to them is they'll get access to new clients. Is there like revenue share? What's the business model?
Yeah, so it depends on the exchange and depends on the data source that we're going to. Sometimes they're like, oh, we want a revenue share, and then sometimes they're like a flat fee every month. We personally prefer the flat fee from our end because it's like then the margins, it scales a lot better for us internally. So, but yeah, that's basically how we do it. Yeah.
Very cool. And then you've got to marry up the customers that want the data, and you guys are the middle. And what were some of the original customers? What industries were they in? What pain were they feeling?
Yeah, that's the thing is before, so we're sadly, or for better or worse, I guess, we're not a lean startup. So we can't do the overnight MVP, launch a crappy MVP app or something, and then have a bunch of users play with it and give us feedback and tell me it sucks. Because data is such a difficult game to play. It's both hardware and software. We have to assemble hardware, co-locate it at the exchange, basically become like, one with the exchange in terms of like just being in their location, having all the hardware in place, and then we have to gather the data, clean it up, put it in the right formats. So we have to create software as well for that, and platforms and APIs and everything. And so it was a very large place. So while we were building all of that, we started opening up the website for just initial signups. And so far we have about a little over 4,000 signups so far. And I think out of in terms of who they are, I think less than half now are like larger organizations like the Goldman Sachs, Bank of Americas of the world. We have like Google's, Amazon's, like those types of organizations. And then the other more than half are startups whose names sometimes we haven't heard of them before. And I think that's amazing. It's like, it's been fun to hear stories from startups about, what they're trying to do with our data. And sometimes it could be for individual purposes. And sometimes it's for, bringing some company or building an app or something on top of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. All of these organizations that have a ton of data are trying to get some sort of other data, right?
Always. I think it's a part of it's because data access is so difficult, and the way that these older, data companies are formed is like by head, right? You sell it by head, and so when they hire a new person to join the team, that new person doesn't have any access to what the old data the company has, and so suddenly they're back on the market again for new data.
Yeah.
So that's why they come over. Yeah.
Yeah. sometimes I get snarky about data and products. I'm like, it's just a big spreadsheet,
Yeah.
right? Like, what are the formats that people want the data in?
All kinds of stuff. Yeah. We offer it in like, I think 8 or 9 different formats at this time. And yeah, sometimes it's like they just want a CSV file.
Oh,
Sometimes it's like, oh, they want it in, like binary encoding or something else. So they can choose. We offer like really granular data. So there's certain data formats where it's like super granular. It's called like order book depth. They get like the whole depth of the order book, and they get like data that's not just like at the surface level, but like deeper stuff included as well. So we can do that. We do live data. We do historical. So kind of just everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you've lived in this world for a long time. You're building your company around it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever get surprised by anyone, like the data that they actually have?
Yeah.
People,
all the
industries?
time. Yeah. I'm surprised by like sometimes there's, even small companies that have treasure troves of alternative data that they're just sitting on. And they're trying to, where it's like maybe one day we could help them to, figure out how to monetize that. But it's interesting to see all the, there's all this data that's been created in the last couple of years or so that is very valuable. I think it's just like, what are we going to do with it? And, this isn't like the private user data that, it's not like not talking about that kind of stuff. That's a different story, right? I don't know what I think about Facebook doing that kind of stuff to our data, but just more like, just other types of data that people are gathering, whether it's like lab data, and it's like that could be used to help cure a lot of diseases, but it's like hard to be able to share that data with researchers and academics and, things like that as well. So there's a lot of other areas I think that could be improved on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great example. So if, let's say it is lab data
Mm-hmm.
and another company, whether they're big, small, or medium, they had a brain shock where like, oh, that would be valuable data.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you've connected with that input and then there's your output, you would serve as like the middle platform, right?
Right, exactly. So potentially that could be something we do one day. Right now, we focus mainly on market data and then very common sources of alternative data that are like everyone kind of needs. So it's like SEC filings or calendar dates or things like that. Maybe one day we'll go into other fields and work with companies on that. But yeah, the sky is the limit, I guess. There.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so you mentioned Utah native and you came back, and as you build out your team, you've got to wear a lot of hats, I would imagine. Chief morale officer, chief fundraiser, chief executive. How do you divide up your duties? Grow the company, raise money, don't run out of money,
Right.
hire and stay semi-sane.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, thankfully I'm a second time founder. That means thankfully I've survived somehow the first time around. The first time around, to be honest, we learned a lot through the mistakes that we made. And it's tough because one of the lessons I learned was no amount of text. You can read all these textbooks, take entrepreneurship classes, go to entrepreneurship seminars, and that does not teach you how to run a company. You just have to do it yourself. Get your, just have your skin in the game truly and learn from experience and mistakes, to really learn. And so for my first company, what was funny was, and this is what I wrote my kind of book about that's not published right now. But basically I read the book Principles by Ray Dalio. And basically just, billionaire dude, he talks about all the cool principles he has for his hedge fund, Bridgewater, and how it, led him throughout life in the right direction and stuff. So I would, that's what I was like 22, this was like 10 years ago. I was 22 at the time. And I was like, I'm going to come up with my own principles, so we came up with our own millennial driven principles. So just to give you some funny examples, like we wanted a flat managerial structure. And the goal is like, look, we wanted to hire people 3 times my age. I want to hire people who's 66, So how do I hire them? Well, let's be flat. So I don't want them to call me boss. Like that's kind of weird, right? And so hire people like that. And we want people also younger to join and feel welcome too. So that people aren't afraid to, speak up and ask questions and stuff. So we're like flat managerial structure. Okay, let's also invest in bigger name service providers like bigger lawyers or accountants. We needed a big auditor because it's like, well, we don't have a reputation. As a hedge fund, reputation is everything. You've probably seen out in the news. There's certain hedge funds these days. They used to have a good reputation, and overnight their reputation gets destroyed by something. And so we were like, okay, well, how do we build this? I look like a kid. Now I'm compliment. Now I'm like, okay, I look like a kid. That's a good thing. But back then that was a bad thing because I was actually like 22. And so, so it was like talking, just like, how do I convince investors to invest So I was like, oh, we have invest in these bigger name. Like, let's get like a, what do you call it? Deloitte or like a KPMG or whatever, PwC to like be your auditor, right? Household names. And then another perk was like, for example, just having lots of being almost like Google. We wanted our hedge fund office to look more like Facebook or Google when you walk in, rather than like this is pre-pandemic, a long time ago. So before, now we're 100% remote, but before then it was like, let's just have lots of perks like free food or like we had a game room and all these other kind of fun perks. I think we had a office puppy masseuse, like this kind of stuff, and as it turns out, over the next 10 years of running this first company, almost all of those principles turned out wrong in the end. So yeah, that's the story. All those turned out wrong. So just to give you an example again, what was it? I said flat managerial structure, right? Like what could possibly go wrong? Well, everything went wrong with the flat managerial. Just surprisingly, it sounds cool and it sounds like something you'd want to do in principle. And there's books written about why it's awesome. Well, it didn't turn out well for us because one thing we discovered is there's a difference between fairness and equality. And we gave everyone an equal title. Everyone's title is partner. That's very bad because then, we have people who just came out of college and they're suddenly a partner. They have nowhere to grow, no room to expand in their career. And they're asking me for a partner level salary, which I didn't want to give that to them because it was unfair. And I had to explain why they were paid less than this other partner, who has 40 years of experience, right? So, there's just a lot of drama that it caused. And same with the perks I mentioned, like all the free food. Yes, free food sounds like really cool. And I know there's articles written about it these days because companies are trying to woo employees back into the office with really nice free food. But to be honest with us, over the years of doing this, we noticed it caused more problems. For example, we have vegans, we have vegetarians, we have ketogenic diet, Atkins diet. I learned all the diets because I was the one, me and my one of my colleagues, we were the ones who were kind of coordinating the food and stuff. I learned about like Whole30. I didn't even know these existed, what else? I learned, about like halal and kosher and even like, Mormon diet. There's certain kinds of Buddhist diets, Hindi, like there's just so many cultures and so many diets we had to accommodate. And I'm glad, look, I'm really happy my team is super diverse. That was really awesome, but it just came with a lot of dietary restrictions. And so every time we ordered meals for somebody, someone was unhappy. Someone couldn't eat. Someone said, oh, there's gluten in this meal. Oh, there's cheese. Oh, there's, meat in this. And they were unhappy about it. It caused so much drama that, we decided like, let's just cancel this, stop doing these perks, And people were leaving, by the way. The problem was people were leaving our company at the end of the day. And I was like, why are they leaving? We have all these free perks. We're like Facebook and Google. That's our culture. And then we learned, like, wait, people don't stay because of free food. They don't stay because of, I would stay because of office puppies, but they don't stay because of, they don't stay because of a masseuse or puppies or whatever. Like people stay because their voice is being heard, because they're contributing to the, they're learning and they're contributing, and they love the mission of the company, and they have a healthy team, and they're growing, right? And I think those are the reasons why people truly stay, within a company. And we had to learn that the hard way. Like, wait a second, we should be focused on our mission and going back to what matters the most is, just focusing on this, not about the food. It's not about the extra fun stuff that we have, all the parties. And we had a lot of Halloween parties and stuff like that. And anyway, so it's not about that. So that was a big lesson learned too over the years. And then the final one was the bigger service providers. That one almost killed my company, my first company back in the day, hiring the big names for, like accounting or lawyers and stuff like that. So we did it for reputation alone. And then one thing we realized is like, the big reputation, even for investors, like the famous investor with a really big name, usually they're the first to leave when they find something goes wrong. They're not going to be there in the trenches with you when everything goes wrong, to help you out. Chances are they're probably not, right? It's the no-name person who worked really hard and has, really, they're willing to pick things up from the bootstraps and help you out, when everything goes wrong, right? And so we were paying way too much money for these big names, some famous people out there, famous lawyers and stuff. But then we, one of our accountants was really late on financial statements. And in the hedge fund world, you have to report to the SEC, and all these other regulators by a certain date in April. Or basically they're going to investigate you and you could get fined for being late. You can get in a lot of trouble. These are pretty strict deadlines, and our accountant was late on the deadline. And, we kept on asking what's going on, and they kept on saying, sorry, we have bigger clients to deal with. And as a startup, that's the last thing you want to hear is, sorry, we have bigger customers to deal with, right? Like who wants to hear that? Nobody, right? Yeah. So that was when I realized like, wow, why am I being treated like we should work for, just work with an accountant. Doesn't matter if they're smaller, but they should treat us like we're the kings and queens that we are. You know what I mean? Like treat you like the king that you are. And so we switched to a smaller accounting firm in India. They're fantastic. Yeah, like no one knows who they are, but the thing is they get their job done on time, and it's for 3 times cheaper than what we would have paid a top tier firm in the U.S. And so just lessons learned the hard way over the years. And that's how I've gotten this far today, just learning those things, and thankfully not getting a lot of scars along the way, but not too many to the point where I'm just like, burnt out too much. So
yeah. Well, that's really cool. Those are some really great examples. And I want no part of what you just described, right? Like, it'd be, you get what you get, you don't throw a fit.
Okay.
Or I guess you can leave. So, yeah, all the way from like accountants not meeting their deadlines to people mad about diets. Yep. Great lessons learned there. Very cool. Yeah, the best book I've ever read about hedge funds was Jim Cramer's Confessions of a Street Addict.
Yes.
Really, really good. I really like him. He's very cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been really fun and enlightening. And yeah, I'm glad that you still have one more go around, because it sounds like you guys are doing something very cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to join.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You bet.